This is Chapter 9, Part 1. This chapter is about interpersonal relationships, and this particular section of the chapter covers the different stages of relationships. So we begin with just some definition type things about relationships. One, science has proven that relationships are very important for our happiness. Humans are social creatures and we're not meant to be alone. And so there's connections between loneliness and depression. Whenever people isolate themselves from other people, those lack of relationship scenarios don't always do the best things for people. So we need to have these relationships. And so whenever we are looking to develop relationships, it's going to be important for us to know some of the things in this chapter. Another thing they point out is that there are several relationships within each interpersonal relationship. I think I prefer to say it there are several observed relationships because this has to do with perspective. When two people are in a relationship, they both see their relationship from their point of view. They both see where they want the relationship to go and how they want it to develop, and they see it differently. And then there are the outside observers as well, who also see the relationship and the way it is and the way it might be. Relationships will develop in stages, which is what we'll spend the next several slides going over. The first stage is what's called the contact stage. This is when you first meet or encounter someone. So it may be perceptual contact, so where you first see someone, whether that's that love at first sight kind of scenario, or it's just you meet someone in a classroom environment for the first time, or something like that. Maybe online if you read about them. And then there's the interactional first contact. And that's where you take that first perceptual contact and then you extend it to wanting to interact with that person. So it may be like you ask someone if you can buy them coffee, or if they'd like to join a social organization that you're a part of, to go bowling. It's something like that. It's just encouraging interaction as the first step. This is where first impressions are really garnered and developed. The second stage is the involvement stage. Here we test suitability between us and these potential relationship partners. Do keep in mind that as we talk about relationships here, we're not always talking about romantic relationships. These may be friendships, platonic relationships. In some cases, even, I guess in most cases, even work relationships will fall in these development stages as well. When it comes to testing suitability, this is kind of the interview phase. You've met them already, first impressions were already formed back in the contact stage. So now you're asking questions, you're getting to know them better, trying to determine if this person is really right for you and if you will actually be decent friends. And then another part of the involvement stage is trying to move forward to the next stage. And that will look different, of course, if you're in a platonic relationship or trying to make it a romantic relationship. That next stage is called intimacy. Now, again, that word is going to imply romance. Intimacy here just means that it's a closer relationship, more personal. There's going to be more self-disclosure. There's going to be more heartfelt conversations, those kinds of things. But really the focus of the authors, they focus on that romantic element more so than anything else throughout this discussion. In the intimacy phase, you have the interpersonal commitment phase, meaning where you make a private commitment to your new partner, where you decide that you are going to be a couple something like that. And then that social bonding phase is where you make it public, and you know meet each other's parents, or you start hanging out with the friends of your partner, and they start hanging out with your friends. So not only are the two in the relationship bonding with each other, but they're also bonding with additional friends. And then the next phase is what's called deterioration. This is, as the term implies, where the relationships might start to break down. And most relationships go through this at some point. So there's different ways to think about this, different ways to approach it for sure. You have the two terms intrapersonal and interpersonal. And what we'll see in a deterioration phase is that, pardon me, within oneself, we'll start thinking about how dissatisfied we are with the relationship. Maybe one particular element, it may be several things, and if that's not brought out and talked about, a lot of times that deterioration and dissatisfaction is just going to continue. So that intrapersonal, that internal dissatisfaction will then lead to an interpersonal, between the two, deterioration. So what that will look like is less frequent interaction, fewer things to talk about. It will start to become apparent that there is increasing distance between the individuals. The next phase or stage is called the repair stage. This is where basically people look at the relationship and decide if it's worth salvaging. If people do want to repair it, what their intent is to return to an earlier stage. Maybe back to intimacy, definitely not back to deterioration, but perhaps back to the involvement phase or the getting to know each other again, something like that. Oftentimes this repair phase will take the help of outside sources, whether that be friends or professional help from counseling, those kinds of things, depending on the nature of the relationship. You have intrapersonal repair, so that's looking at ourselves. What can I do to make the relationship better? And each partner that wants to fix the relationship would do that. And then there's interpersonal repair. This is where you have those conversations. It may be difficult, but you negotiate the relationship, how things might have changed, and they'll never be the same as they were again. But can we still move forward, or in the case of the stages, move backwards to a place where we're happy again? Those kinds of things can happen and do happen on a regular basis. And then you have disillusion. This is where the relationship just breaks down. It's the repair phase was considered a failure. It didn't pan out. And so the relationship is dissolved. There's interpersonal separation. This kind of like back in the intimacy phase where you have the private and the public phases, the interpersonal separation, that's going to be the private phase when you're trying to work things out or you're thinking about it. You're trying out being single again if this is a romantic relationship, but it's private, you're not talking about it yet. And then if both parties are satisfied or one party is satisfied with that, then you move on to make it social or public knowledge. So these stages are not necessarily only going to move one direction. You can go forward and backward, as was indicated when we talked about repairing the relationship and going back to something else. So there's movement among the stages, and there's different ways that we move forward, backwards, and so on. There are turning points within a relationship. These can be positive or negative. A relationship is going to build slowly at first. You're not going to go from that very first phase where you just meet someone and suddenly you're in the intimacy phase. It's going to take time to build that, to actually get to know one another on an interpersonal level. So those turning points may be things like the first date or the first kiss or things like that. In a platonic relationship, turning points are going to be different. They're going to be um, the first time you tell your friend about a problem that you have at work or with a spouse or something like that. Those turning points are going to be different in platonic or friendships, friend relationships. And then there's the idea of relationship license and relationship license change. Relationship license is just the established norm. It's the allowed behavior within the relationship. So the example from the text included eating and drinking your friend or your partner's meal. Maybe you're out at a restaurant and you want to sample other people's plates. Well, you don't do that with a stranger, but in a friendship, in a relationship, generally that might be acceptable. There are some relationships that will never develop that far. Um, some people just can't handle eating after somebody else or drinking after somebody else. And you accept that in the relationship. That is a limitation. And it's not that big of a deal once you establish the norm. But the idea that these norms change over time is something that we need to accept uh, as relationships dissolve. Don't expect to have the same kind of interaction with them the next time you see them. Especially on friendships, we may have some problems getting around that mentally. That even though we may never have had any kind of romantic interest with one another, when friendships dissolve and you see that person again, it's still not going to be the way it was ever. It may not have been bitter feelings, but maybe just new interests. And so those relationship licenses change, and we need to adapt to those. And they change for both positive and negative reasons.